No, we don't have that many minutes. We have probably 15 minutes to talk about the agency's plan on marketing and the, um, especially the spillover, the excess money from, is it rooms and meals that goes to uh, your agency for marketing? So I guess this is an area that has gone through significant change of late. And I'm going to get this wrong, but the gist of it is that you struggled with an admittedly low budget for marketing, at least compared to other states in the region. The Chamber of Commerce and the agency came in asking for a few $100,000 bump a few years ago. Uh, in some ways, with the CARES money and the immediacy of getting money out the door, you hit a jackpot in terms of getting millions. And now, and then you ask for even millions more that I guess we didn't give, but now you're asking for $1 million with this ongoing funding source. So, um, what's the justification? What's the history of how you spent this new money that you've gotten? And uh, I guess what's the argument for such a huge increase from a year to year in the state's marketing program?
Well, thank you for the question, and good morning again, everyone. For the record, my
I
name is
think
Heather
I
Pelham.
think
I'm
you're
the
on.
commissioner.
I'm not hearing. Okay.
Oh, that doesn't help him.
Go ahead. I'm sorry. It was on my end. I can hear you.
Okay. For the record, Heather Pelham, Commissioner of the Department of Tourism and Marketing. Thank you for the question in terms of, sort of how we got here. As you alluded to, the state of Vermont has a much smaller budget than our nearest competitors by quite a lot. And we have come to the legislature for one-time funding in the past to get us back on a level playing field. So, we did come to this body, this time last year to ask for $1 million increase, and we are doing that again this year. But I have to say that the context now, is even more imperative than it ever has been. In terms of what we've seen that the sector has suffered over this pandemic, we're looking at rooms and meals tax revenue being down by 48 million. So far, our estimates of visitor spending are down by 700 million. So just to orient folks, this sector usually brings in $3 billion of visitor spending. So in the last year, we're down 700 million. And to be honest, those numbers would be even greater if we hadn't seen some of our second homeowners actually stay long term. The unemployment numbers are also, they're difficult because we're still waiting on data. There's such a lag. But the job losses that we saw in June were half of the workforce of the sector. So normally 30,000 people are employed in the sector. In June, that was down to 15,000. And that's just the estimate that we are attributing to visitation. We know that some folks are back to work, but they have reduced hours. They're facing seasonal layoffs depending on if businesses are shuttered, short term, maybe long term. And then just one other statistic that I would just, share with folks just to get a context for this ask is that, we're not only just looking at the loss of tax revenue, but we are seeing the number of filers decreasing. So again, there's a lag in these numbers, but at the end of the second quarter, the number of properties filing rooms and meals tax receipts year over year was down 62%. At the end of the third quarter, that drop improved. It was still down 43% year over year. And, we know that winter is just as challenging, as the previous months have been for the sector. So, I just can't stress enough that, it's not just the historic underinvestment in this sector. It is the ability for this sector to recover. That, even when travel is safe again, our recovery will be stunted if there is no place for folks to stay or places to eat. So I really see this as, with any industry, if we don't invest in our infrastructure, we take the positive impacts of that tax revenue and those jobs that, we have talked about, many times before in terms of what the sector contributes, we take that for granted. So that's really the backdrop in terms of this ask. So we are asking for one-time funding again of $1 million, but we're also asking for a way to fund this sector long-term, so that we aren't coming back every year necessarily to ask for this funding, but we're able to create a mechanism that refunds the sector that actually creates these tax receipts. So the proposal is to start, with $1 million in the fund, but then to look at the difference between the rooms and meals taxes that are collected at the end of the fiscal year, compare that to the consensus revenue forecast from that previous January, so that in years where there's more tax that's been collected that has been forecasted and therefore not budgeted, that portion of the rooms and meals tax could come to the department to build our budget over time. And that those funds would be added in the next budget cycle so that the very industry that's collecting that revenue would then see a benefit from the extra promotional power that would come to the state.
So, sorry, Heather, you froze a bit in
Sorry.
in that ask in terms of the long-term funding piece. And maybe others heard the whole thing, but it broke up for me. Would you mind just quickly repeating that?
Sure, of course. So, the long-term funding ask is to look at the rooms and meals tax revenue that is brought in at the end of each fiscal year, compare that to the consensus revenue forecast from the previous January. And so that in years where more tax is collected than was forecasted and therefore not budgeted, that portion of the rooms and meals tax revenue would come to the department. That would then be added into our funds for the next budget cycle. And as I was saying, is to support the very industry that's collecting that revenue so that when the industry itself outperforms, they benefit from the extra promotional power that the state can then provide to support them. So it would be seeded with $1 million in recognition of the fact that, we are behind our competitors and, we can talk about their budgets and the share of the state budget, but when it comes down to it, it costs as much for Vermont to run an ad on TV in Boston as it does for Maine and New Hampshire. So real dollars do make a difference.
So Heather, how much did you get? It seems like you got several $1 million in some late CRF fund in spending the rest of the leftover money. How much did you get?
We got $6.5 million in CRF funding.
Okay.
And I can share that, broadly, the way those funds were utilized were basically three major areas: brand awareness, travel safety, and consumer stimulus.
Can you send us something in writing with more detail on how you spent the money and any effectiveness you've seen as a result of spending that money? And also, as you know, there's some criticism out there that marketing dollars are not necessarily gets a great return on investment. And I'm sure there are a lot of papers that show otherwise. And I'm sure there are states that must have done some bumps in their marketing campaign. Can you send us some information to show the effectiveness of those increased marketing campaigns? And I guess the last thing I would like to understand in a memo that you can send to us is why, after getting $6.5 million, you need another $1 million.
Well, the easy answer to that question is that, that $6.5 million needed to be spent before the end of the fiscal year. It's a little bit ironic that, yes, we've been asking for funding all these years and that we should receive it, with such constraints to be able to use it. Number one, we did do some consumer stimulus programs to help, the state recover, given the fact that folks could not travel here. And again, I hear you. Yes, we can provide, more detail on all of this. We did do some big, quote unquote, big brand awareness work to inspire travel when travel was safe again. And one of the things we did was create some video assets through a partnership with the Discovery Network and Outside TV that we can now use again, thinking how can we use that one-time money for future uses. But then we also had to spend a fair chunk of that budget telling folks that ahead of the ski season the rules were, you have to quarantine. Quarantine is required. You have to plan ahead. That's not the kind of marketing that we ever would have assumed that we would need to do. And so, yes, we did receive money, but it wasn't the kind of money with the kind of ability for us to do the brand awareness work to inspire visitation as we would have loved to do. We used it as best we could and did, many different strategies and tactics to kind of approach it from as many angles as we could. But I think it's a little unfair to say that, you got some money and, why do you need more? And the numbers that I just shared in terms of the pain that this industry is still facing is stark. And so, increased investment, I feel is just, I'm hoping that we can agree on the why, if not the how. I guess is really how I would sum that up.
So, the CARES money, let's assume you produced a nationwide, I don't know if you did, a nationwide ad that promoted Vermont. Were you able to sign a contract with uh, um, some sort of company that pushes it out the door to say, with that 6.5 million, run this, as long as I sign this contract and give you millions of dollars up front, then you will run that ad for the next year? Or did the ad have to be run by December 31st?
The CARES Act requirements required that ad had to run by December 31st. The partnership that I mentioned with Discovery Networks and Outside TV, one of the reasons why we went that way is that they had video assets from their vast library that they could use. Given the very short time frame that we had to put this together, we had access to that footage to create these ads. Yes, they did run nationally, and I can share with you that the 2 months that the Discovery Network ads ran, we were able to get 45 million impressions. And I'm giving you that in comparison to, in all of 2019, for all of our strategies and tactics, we were able to achieve 63.9 million impressions. So that one tactic, being able to reach a national audience with the budget that we received, just had an amazing impact in the reach. And that's really what our role is that, we've had these discussions, we can't take credit for every dollar of tax revenue that comes in, but our role is to create that brand awareness, to plant that seed, to have folks thinking about coming to Vermont, and fill that funnel, top of the marketing funnel, fill that funnel with visitors. And the only way that we can do that is with reach. And that's what, the reach that the state has is what any individual property or community could never hope to replicate on their own. And so we lift up, all the brand experiences they create to that highest level and do everything we can to get folks thinking about Vermont. And there's an amazing opportunity, a real market opportunity now that we can take advantage, that people are looking to Vermont. They're seeing, how we manage this virus. They're thinking about where is someplace safe to go. There will be pent up demand for folks to travel again, but there's also going to be very stiff competition. Every state, wants to bring visitors back and to help their businesses and their communities, thrive once again. And, I really don't want to see Vermont left behind in that.
Oh,
So
yeah.
we are gonna have to move on, but what I've been asking pretty much all the witnesses is, in addition to the other requests, can you tell us how you would spend this million in a little bit more detail? At this point, I know you probably haven't made final decisions, and how you arrived at the need being $1 million. And if the need was a lot more, but that's all you could get from the governor's proposed budget, say that as well. But, we're functioning as a little mini appropriations committee here to make recommendations to our appropriations committee. So we have to not just blindly accept the number, but understand how that number was derived. So with that,
Just as a
unless you have something else, unless there are some questions, or Heather, you have something more you'd like to add, we will get back to this again. This is not the last
Well,
hearing on this topic.
if people haven't had a chance to see Heather's Restart Vermont Regional Marketing and Stimulus Grant Program. I mean, that's a lot of how we spent this money is in that presentation.
Fine.
And it would be great for us at some point to go through it and see it, and then also look at what it would be great to spend a little more time on this.
Absolutely. I appreciate that. Sorry, I have not read that. So
Yeah, no, it's good. All of Heather's materials are.
Senator Ram.
I think a quick question. I think it's for Heather, but it could be for someone else. With the money that's going through NIFT as a vendor to help people participate in that gift certificate lottery for local businesses, if they don't spend the gift card, does NIFT keep the money or does ACCD get the money back?
Yeah, we've had a couple of questions about that.
Can I hold off on that? Because we need to get to UI, and that's a separate element of their budget request on consumer stimulus. You're going into a different area. We have had some conversations on that in the past, and we'll get back to it. But it's a bigger area than. I mean, you can answer. I think doesn't the money stay with the businesses? But that might be the short answer.
The short and complete answer is the money goes directly to the businesses upfront. Okay. So the businesses that were targeted for this relief receive the money upfront.
Okay. Can we move on, please?
But Mr. Chair, just before you move on, so we're not going to hear from Ted Brady today?
He's here.
No.
Okay, because I think many of us were.
Okay, yes, you had a specific area you wanted to ask Ted.
We're very keen on the special events and arts issues for planning for this spring and summer, and we'd like very much to have the administration address that and the guidance that this sector, which is so hammered, needs. And I just want to make sure that we come back to that either after the floor today, either after the election that we have to go to, or tomorrow. I mean, I know that we're scheduling at 11:30 together, but I just want to put that on as something we're really keen on hearing.
If you want to take a few minutes on that right now, Senator Clarkson, you could take the lead on that with Ted. But let's try to keep it to 3 minutes, and we can come back to it tomorrow too.
Yeah, great. Ted?
Do it tomorrow.
What's your thought?
And doing it tomorrow? Yeah, that's fine by me.
Okay, so
Okay.
Great. I just want to make sure we identify it.
My apologies. There's a lot of competing pressures here.
Yeah. No, we got it.
Let's move to, thank you, Heather, very much. I'm sorry it was so brief, but we're not going to be making these decisions for a while. We may do it on the events thing and we may do it on brownfields, but the one-time monies, generally, we have some time. I'm going to probably wait to see what the House sends us on that. Thank you. So I want to move to the issue of rate relief and added benefits under the UI system. We're going to do this today and tomorrow a little bit, but we only have a little bit of time. I had asked Matt Berwicz to update and consolidate some of his charts. I'm hoping, fingers crossed, that he has something for us in the next 20 minutes, and we can start looking at that. Thank you, everybody else.
Great. Good morning, Mr. Chair. For the record, I'm Matthew Berwicz, Director of Economic and Labor Market Information. Thank you for having me here today. I did share some information with Nathan just a little while ago, and if it's helpful, I can certainly screen share, whatever the chair's pleasure is.
Why don't you screen share, and we will also try and pull it up if we can.
If Nathan's posted it, it is
posted.
Oh, great. Nathan, thanks a million.
Tuesday. Got it.
Okay, so I think I'm also screen sharing.
Okay.
And so you'll see the text and format is very similar to the other legislative testimony that I submitted a week ago. Just for simplicity purposes, and I apologize if the abbreviations are not as we prefer them, but obviously we're working on a compressed timeline. And for those joining the conversation, we're certainly already in the deep end of the pool on these topics of the Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund. So when it comes to language, we're going to be talking about the baseline forecast, which is what was submitted in the annual Unemployment Insurance Trust Fund report. We'll be talking about, quote unquote, the administration's proposal, which you may recall talks about freezing the tax rate schedule at Schedule 1 for 1 year. It also limits the ability for the tax rate schedule to increase by only 2 steps at a maximum in any given year. And then also a freeze of the taxable wage base. That would all encompass the quote unquote administration's proposal. In this language, we're going to be using, we're calling it committee for lack of a better word. The chair has asked that we include a gross up of 20% of benefits. And so what this discussion will do is we're going to look at the information associated with the 3 forecasts. For completeness, this is a similar table that was presented for the baseline as well as the quote unquote administration's proposal. So this would be representing the committee's proposal here. But I thought we would jump right to the 3rd page, because this is, I think, what the chair wanted to talk about a little bit more is how do they compare, right? And like maybe this will get to more of a visual discussion, and we can kind of hash out what we see happening. So there's 3 charts here. There's the baseline forecast, administration's forecast, and the committee's forecast. And then there's 3 components of this. So there's the contributions in millions, benefits in millions, and the year-end trust fund balance in millions. And so, I think we'll start here at the UI trust fund balance. You'll see the blue line is the one that ramps up the quickest and ultimately has the highest balance at the end of the 10-year forecast in 2031. The administration's proposal, because it is limiting contributions in the short run, has a slower uptick, but ultimately catches up not nearly as much to the baseline forecast, but it does play some catch up because it has higher years of contributions in the later years, and we can look at that breakdown if need be. But then as far as the committee, it's very similar to the administration's forecast, except it is a little bit less because it is prioritizing an increase in benefits in the first state year, which is a July 2021 to June 22 calendar. So you'll see that there's a little bit of an impact here, but then it kind of catches up and ultimately results in a little bit lower of a balance, but still about the same track. So I hope, I'm crossing my fingers that this is kind of what the chair was thinking about in terms of how can we visually display this? How can we compare them side to side? And we can get into the nuts and bolts of it if you'd like. But overall, what this represents is how the trust fund is going to respond to these 2 different scenarios relative to the baseline.
Okay, so what this is helpful. It's going to take a little time to digest.
Yes.
One of the things that I was trying to understand was if we increase benefits by 20% for 1 year, how much does that how much added benefits go out in millions of dollars?
In millions of dollars, I'll just have to do some quick math on the fly here. So the benefits, so the difference between the baseline, there is no difference, just for reader guidance, there is no difference between the forecast for benefits paid for the baseline and the administration. So you'll see the blue line and the orange line are the exact same throughout. The committee forecast does have this bump up, a 1 year increase as the guidance provided by the chair.
Let me make it much simpler than that. Don't compare the administration's proposal. Don't talk about contributions at all. Just if we raise benefits by 20%, how much does that cost for 1 year?
Yeah, and that's why I'm kind of stalling, trying to do math on the fly here, because just indicating that the effect would where the increase would take effect in July. So it does the 12 months of this impact would go over the 2 years. So that's what I'm showing and reflecting here in the calendar year of benefits. If we go up and I'll just have to pause. I'll just be quiet for a second while I do some math in my head, trying to compare the benefits paid versus these 2 scenarios. So one moment, please.
So Michael, just to clarify for those of us, because you fill us in here, your proposal is you want us to think about increasing benefits to the claimants 20% for how many years? For 1 year, 2 year?
For 1 year.
For 1 year.
I mean, the benefit in terms of reducing contributions is 1 year. It's actually 2 years because there's a second proposal from the administration. Last year, they made a proposal that just had a 1 year impact on reducing
Right.
contributions. Now they've extended that to a 2 year period, I think. And then they also have a freeze for 1 year on the taxable wage base.
Right.
So essentially, there's a lot of information here, but what I was really looking for
Is balancing.
was how much is it costing the fund in the next fiscal year or next calendar year, whatever period you want to use, to reduce the contributions to employers in millions of dollars,
Right.
based upon not going to Schedule
Schedule 5.
5 right away.
Right.
How much is it going to cost the trust fund in millions of dollars to freeze the taxable wage base that also reduces contributions by employers? And how
Right.
much is it going to cost the trust fund to give unemployed workers a little added benefit
Right.
1 year? And I
Right.
just want to see those figures in millions of dollars. Those could be, that's the primary thing I wanted to see. So 3 sentences. This is what
Right.
this will cost, this is what this will cost, and this will cost. Then we can,
Right.
look at the trust fund and see what the long range impacts of those policy changes would be on the trust fund. And if that $90 million thing they were talking about is the right trigger to turn this on or off, which is a later conversation. But I'm just trying to see whether, just trying to see what the cost of these policy changes are. And I mean, we don't have a lot of time today, but this, as I've said before, stems from the so-called grand bargain in 2010, where we were trying to preserve the health of the trust fund. There was a equitable distribution of pain from, and here we're trying to alleviate some pain because that's caused by this pandemic. And can we do that equitably? So in addition to helping the employer community, can we help the beneficiary community?
Right.
And by how much are we doing each one?
Right.
I'm thinking that what these numbers are going to show is that the amount of help that the administration is asking for the employer community is going to be still significantly larger than what the suggestion I'm making, but at least there would be some help for the beneficiaries.
Right. Nope.
So- Oh, sorry. If, to answer your question about the benefits themselves, it would be totaling $36 million over those 2 years. And as I showed in the benefits, it doesn't continue. So there's no differential. If you look at the contributions versus the baseline forecast and the administration's forecast, the difference over the lifetime of this forecast is $10 million, where there will be $10 million less in contributions between now and 2031 as a result of freezing these schedules.
And that's because, what is the initial, because last year you told us that just going down 2 rate levels, it would save contributions $36 million. Now we're freezing it, so we're going over 5 things. So I'm sure that $36 million is going up. And then there was probably a one-time cost to leaving the base at 14.1 for a year, which I don't think was part of the administration's proposal. So that asks $1 million more. You're suggesting that over 10 years, that will be clawed back somehow. But I was interested in knowing the immediate benefit to the employer committee over the same period that we're talking about, the $36 million benefit to claimants.
Yeah, and I guess I'd be happy to do those calculations for you, but I don't think it's a fair comparison, because ultimately what this is doing is just pushing the obligation out into the future to the benefit, or to the employer community. So it's not that they're not going to have to make these contributions. It's just they won't have to make them next year.
Okay, but I'd still like to see those numbers as to what we are
Yeah,
saving the business community in the same period or over the near term versus the 1 year increase in benefits.
right.
So you can get those. What time is it now? Oh, well, I don't know if you can give that to
It's
us.
about 10:20.
Yeah, okay. Well, we can continue on. Let's, so you can get, that shouldn't be a hard calculation. If you can get that to us while we're continuing to talk, that would be great.
May I ask a question, Mr. Chair?
Yes,
In terms of the calculations, at some point, we will have reached the low point of the amount of money in the trust fund. And the question is, did you do any wargaming to say, what if at or near that point, we had yet another pandemic or an extension of this one? What would happen?
That's a great question, Senator. And we have done some scenarios, especially in the summer. We were more focused on that issue because of the cash flow at that time. We have not done anything as detailed as we did back then, where we, at this point, we are just kind of accepting that we're moving forward and we have not designed a second pandemic, but we could. It's just, yeah, the time we haven't dedicated the time to it as of yet.
Well, there's the assumption that this is a 100-year episode, but as you go back and you track pandemics over time, there have been some cases where it has not been 100 years. The Russian flu of 1899 compared to the Spanish flu of 1918, both of which affected Europe, is an example of that. And there are others. And it would seem to me that we ought to have at least a war game, if you will, to say, what if, to make sure that our low point is not too low to give us comfort.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to look into that, because our thinking thus far on it, and I think we've discussed this a little bit, is that a second wave would not be as dire if it happens cumulatively. If we go back to full strength in the economy and then it comes on again, then there'll be a lot of economic disruption associated with it. But because we haven't gotten back to full strength, so to speak, the disruption would be less if it does return. But we could put something out. Are you thinking something in the next year or two, or more like 3 or 5 years?
Well, I'm just thinking with dynamic modeling, you really look along the whole trend, the whole trend line over time.
Okay.
Because what you're really looking for, I think, is what's the lowest point that the fund should be to give you comfort.
Right.
Okay.
And what is that? Is that 90? Is that 100? What is that figure?
yeah, I mean, these, I think following up on Senator Brock and Senator Clarkson, because that's something we have to look at in the governor's proposal, is that these changes don't switch on if the trust fund balance is in December of this year is anticipated to be or is expected to be below $90 million. And we have to look at that and make a decision whether we accept that or not. The charts that I've seen, the projections have, correct me if I'm wrong, with or without these proposals, you're still looking at the trust fund balance being in the hundreds of millions of dollars. So it's very unlikely that we're going to not trigger this on if we use the $90 million as the trigger. But in terms of Senator Brock's question, if we want this fund to be healthy in the long term, are we getting precariously close? And the way I heard it described was that that $90 million was picked because that was the minimum amount of money that you would need to get through like the first quarter of benefits.
Right.
I
That's
mean,
what
if
we
we had,
heard.
we had a surge, another surge in the beginning of next year, I don't think we would want to do any of these policies if it appears that the fund is at $90 million in September. If it was projected to be $250 million, maybe we would be safe. I guess it's another way of asking the same question that Senator Brock's asking.
And we'd be happy to look into that and see, what information would be helpful to the committee to make their decisions.
Okay, well, we're gonna try, excuse me. Maybe you can give us some feedback on that, Matt, tomorrow, because we're gonna try and move this issue and the S10 issue tomorrow along, and then next week, we're gonna have witnesses come in on perhaps the latest committee thinking, and my hope is to vote either separately or together, both of these bills out next week. So we're getting close, and please feel free today to write me if there's any concern or other ideas come up to you on these charts that I haven't been clear on, that you would like some dialogue with me on to make them most useful for us tomorrow. Does anybody have anything else today? Please get me questions or Matt questions on this stuff if you want. We have 5 minutes for a little break before we're due on the floor. So I want to thank everybody. Another tight, packed day. If anybody has any questions now, please let me know. Or if Matt or Cameron, I think you're there, have anything else you want to say. Tomorrow we'll also get into the rehiring issue. Again, I think we probably have not a lot of time yet tomorrow, but maybe an hour, I think, on this tomorrow.
Mr. Chair,
Check your schedule. The agenda has changed a little bit. Yes, Senator Ram.
I sent folks an article from the Washington Post about what kinds of jobs just aren't coming back as we look at pandemic recovery. And it just, for me, like a little light bulb went off today, having commerce and labor in today, that it feels like we're investing so much in businesses surviving, not quite understanding who they're hiring back necessarily, and just not enough in what the nimble future of work needs to look like for individuals to survive, for humans to survive. So I'm just like, I know that's a lot to sort of say right now in 5 minutes, but it just felt really, that hit me really strongly today, that I just want to see our investments side by side and understand how we're reinvesting in the workforce, regardless of what businesses will come back and what the future of work will look like.
It's a timely question. We're going to try and find some time early next week to look at the skinny appropriations bill we've been talking about. And one of the items that I think the House is going to send up is a gap recovery grants program for $10 million to help businesses that were recent startups. So it might dovetail nicely with that article and your comments. So with that, we'll see you all on the floor.